state that does it this way. So that they would be requiring a cultivation site to send to a dispensary in 4-gram packages.
Yes.
Otherwise, I think it helps to reduce the opportunities for diversion, and I think our preference is that the 2 pounds of plant material be processed into saleable product packaging at the processor, not at the dispensary. And the pharmacy analogy at the pharmacy, if there is additional processing being done, it's being done by a pharmacist.
I think what will help is too, James, is that we're still working on the 90-day supply rules. Once those start to become more clear, we're hoping that'll give guidance upstream to both the processor and the cultivator, saying, look, here's how it's going to generally speak, or how it's going to lay out. Hopefully that will give you some latitude on how to package, so we don't inherently create waste. That's still coming, and I would hope to be latitude to revisit that once that becomes more clear. It's not there yet.
Do we know when we'll have one this?
So our hope is that we have been asked to have those ready for the February committee meeting, and we're working hard to get supporting power behind that to get it ready for well ahead of that, so we can get it out in everybody's hands for review prior to that date.
And I hope you'll all indulge me just based on my constituency. The major concern is that we don't know what a 90-day supply is by the time the cultivator rules are already to JCAR. That has a huge impact on this entire system. And again, I want to be entirely respectful of all the work that's going into this. But to do something like requiring that a plant processor is delivering in each individual segment what would amount to a 90-day supply that we don't know of yet before those rules, or they're already at JCAR. I mean, you've already headed down a road that's going to have tremendous impact on price to the patient, and that's my concern. And I am seeing a system here, based on the rules thus far, that is going to be very, very untenable for the patient in terms of the price they're receiving, based on what we've seen in other states. And it seems like we're gathering those pieces that are most restrictive.
Sure. Well, it's a situation where we can surely talk to, in more detail, folks that are representing processors. Vertical integration will present us a challenge here, because if it's a cultivator who is also a processor, then they may be going down a pathway already. There may be other processors that are not integrated that way. I would contend that we haven't grown plant 1. We haven't even built space 1 yet. So I think we have some time before they get too far down their operational pathway to bring some shape to 90 days. So as they do build out their structure and their processing rules, we will have clear direction for them to do so. That's our goal. Okay, let's see. We are now in Rule Section 3. Dispensary premises generally, basically what you just look like. Some of those space rules are there. Questions are there. Now we're at hours of operation. Karen, Nancy, so you want to
I do have a question about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Familiar with a lot of families that work 12-hour shifts that go to work at 6:30 in the morning and get home off at 7:30 and home at 8. So why were those hours chosen? And I appreciate the 35 hours a week to provide access to the caregivers who work. But why the restriction on the 7 a to 7 p for everybody?
This is a model that you'll see in a lot of other states. There are hourly limitations in when a dispensary can operate. It's a typical rule, actually. The time frame is something I'm certainly willing or interested in hearing suggestions on. If there's a more appropriate time frame,
I guess
interested in
I would wonder if some places could be 7 to 7 and others could be 8 to 8 and others could be 9. If you want to keep your 12-hour restriction, but allowing an adjustment for families who work and are their caregiver for someone who needs to go and purchase this or access it. It's just a thought that at 7 to 7 just hit me as a shift time that many workers work.
Are there any restrictions on weekends or holidays?
There are no restrictions on weekends and holidays, so they'll still be required to be open 35 hours, even if it's a holiday.
Public comment around that, I think, will be coming as well. So we'll look forward to that. Any questions, comments, hours of operation? 6304, what's happening when the stores are closed, the dispensary is closed. Mostly about security and safety. 6305, the designated representative. Comments or questions around that person? Understanding the scope of their work. I think the rule pretty much explains what they're responsible for. So we're going to no? Okay. 6306, the clinical director role. So we have a number of healthcare professionals around the table. I'd be interested in your comments on how you see the role of a clinical director in this space. You see the licensees that are called out there, and curious on your thoughts about how you see that playing out from mainly a consultative role.
I noticed they're not spelled out in the definition of clinical director. In the definition section, you don't spell out.
Okay.
Thanks. It's in rule, not in definition.
Oh, okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Being a
again,
clinical practitioner, jump right in there.
so obviously this provision in and of itself in a vacuum is great, right? I mean, the language here is lifted almost exactly from Arizona, which has proven to be in many ways a successful model. But the drum that I've been beating, and again appreciate you guys indulging me, is that it has worked because the front end requirements in terms of physician autonomy are so broad, right? That there's such respect for the doctor-patient relationship that you don't have the kind of restrictions that we see here on a written recommendation, nowhere near in Arizona, right? So the ability then to have a medical director on site gains importance, whereas here there's a tremendous amount of redundancy, that we have so much on the front end, and then again requiring this medical director in place. So not only do you have, again, in Arizona, far less requirements for physician certification as well. There's only 2 states that I'm aware of that approach it, that are programs that are operational, have been operational. Connecticut, that has a pharmacist in every dispensary, again, not what would be deemed a successful program. Arizona does. And when I saw the language here, and in fact Aaron and I had talked about this some time ago, that I am not against, and I don't think for good reason, for patient safety, there's any problem with having a medical director there. I think it's a great step to take. But once again, when we compile the program as we've seen it thus far together, we're creating so much potential for an exorbitant price to the patient, which is going to force people to the black market. They're not going to want to participate in the system. And then the very fundamental issue that Dr. Mitchell brought up about being able to withstand the demands of the regulatory requirements and the costs associated with them, on top of having what we could probably guess would be at minimum a $75,000 employee on the payroll of the dispensary. It's creating a lot of challenges for the price to the patient.
If I could, the clinical director is not required to be on site, but nor is the clinical director required to be a full-time employee. And at the risk of sounding argumentative, which I don't intend, I don't think I'm willing to accept your characterization of the requirements that we're putting on the physicians. It doesn't seem that way to me, but I don't want to hijack this meeting. And
I guess I'm only viewing that through the lens of cannabis legislation, quite frankly. I mean, I don't want to play doctor here at all, but I'm just telling you from what we see in other states, and certainly that was part of the mandate of the black letter of the statute, was to see what has worked in other states. Best practices, I think, can be viewed to say not only what is ensuring the protection for all of Ohio citizens, but also to say what has created a workable program. And we have chosen the most restrictive regulatory framework as it relates to physicians. I would love to hear what state is more restrictive. I mean, again, without being argumentative at all.
No, I don't want to debate it. I want to proceed with the meeting, but that's certainly not your impression of what the medical board laid out and mine. We're just not on the same page. But perhaps we could take some time to discuss it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so a comment from a provider perspective on this is I don't have much of a concern about having a clinical director that fills one of those roles. What I actually have a concern with is actually provision B. And if you look at provision B, essentially what that does is it doubles the employees that you need, because it states in B2, able to be contacted by dispensary employees. So essentially what you're saying is that person can't take vacation. That person can't take weekends off. That person has to be always available when the clinic's in operation. So to actually get someone to take that role, you're going to need at a minimum 2. So I'm not certain that provision that says they've always got to be in contact makes sense in a clinical director role. Because in any other healthcare clinical director role, you can be a clinical director. That doesn't mean you are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year available, which is what this is saying.
I'm just going to take a look at more flexibility in language.
Does it help that it says during the hours of operation of the dispensary?
Well, if you're thinking about hiring somebody, your dispensary is going to want to be open most of the time. So, you know, from a market perspective, you don't want to close your dispensary for a week while your clinical director goes on vacation.
And so another question on all these points, how do you see compensation, you know, I think, you know, you mentioned the number and you said, well, maybe it won't be that much. Do you guys have any concept or idea of what it looks like? So I know they can do 5 and it's not necessarily a full-time thing. Are they compensated in cash or are there restrictions? Could they be compensated in equity in the dispensary, or is there any limitations on what it looks like?
We have not discussed any limitations on compensation here. And they wouldn't be a physician with a certification to recommend, they wouldn't be able to. So I don't think the equity issue would be an issue.
No, I'm just curious.
And under the statute, they've got a lot of responsibility and a lot of exposure to it. They're not going to be willing to sign up to that and not be compensated significantly.
Yeah, not to mention the federal issue too.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a license, that's a risk that you're taking about what that looks from a federal perspective in your DEA business physician. So there's going to have to be some compensation for that risk. So I actually think if it's a physician or a pharmacist or a nurse, the compensation is actually going to have to be higher than what their alternative options are going to be to account for the risk premium for what they're doing.
So that's a good question. So do you or anyone actually on this committee have any idea or comments on what extra exposures would be borne by that physician, clinical director, or nurse?
We do know that these people, that this role is a role that exists, for instance, in Arizona, and where a physician fills that role. I am not aware, and I have reviewed the case law of cases taken against them by the DOJ or DEA, against any action taken against us. I am not aware. I have not seen one.
That's helpful.
I just wanted to make kind of a general comment in that I definitely agree with and recognize Dr. Mitchell's point about having one person might be unrealistic in this role, but I kind of equate the idea of what this person is supposed to represent as being almost, so in medicine, we have trainees who are seeing patients overnight and things, and we have an attending physician who may not physically be present there, but who is someone who's available to the trainees and to kind of the people who are making things run on the day-to-day level for when those tough things come through. And I think having a healthcare professional in this role is ideal because I think that there are a lot of folks on your list that you've included in that healthcare professional role who would be best suited to identify things like drug interactions, to apply the practices of evidence-based medicine, to interpret any signs and symptoms that might be related to adverse drug reactions, if the therapies are working, and help to report that back to the physician, and then that can help them with their compilation of the annual report, for example. So I think while it may not be realistic to have one person, I think that the overall idea of having a healthcare professional in that role of a clinical director, I think is ideal, in my opinion.
Can I clarify something? Is this part of the statute, the way the hospital is written, that this person be present?
No.
It's not.
No, it's not.
As I understand it, the practical aspect of this is somebody who walks into a dispensary, pays some money for a bag of a plant material and leaves. They don't use it there, obviously. They're not coming there to be diagnosed. That was prohibited. Why even have such a position? Can we just circumvent it, not have the position?
So there are a number of states